Of the two primary factions we have in the Warcraft universe as of the launch of World of Warcraft in late 2004, the Alliance was the one that really didn't see any kind of legitimate reformation between RTS games. Warcraft 3 had a wonderful story with the Orcs, their journey across the Great Sea around the Maelstrom, and finding allies and confronting their past. The human campaign in Warcraft 3, however, where you follow along Prince Arthas' descent into madness and setting up a truly stellar Undead Scourge campaign to follow, did nothing of that. In fact, it only went to show how the Alliance of Lordaeron from Warcraft 2 had dissipated. So, in that case, how do we go from an alliance of human nations, Quel'Thalas and the dwarves of Ironforge and Airy Peak, to no real alliance to speak of in Warcraft 3, to suddenly a major faction once again with an assumed deep tie to this new group of savage night elves sitting off the opposite side of the world? Does the alliance of World of Warcraft even make sense when you take the events of Warcraft 3 and the Frozen Throne into consideration? Welcome to Ancient Lore, a discussion series where we peel back the layers of world building and story to examine, understand, and discuss where we came from in the World of Warcraft. Today's topic is the fractured history of the Alliance of of the Eastern Kingdoms? Of Stormwind? We'll talk about it. And as always, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below or connect with me on my Discord. For an accurate analysis of what the Alliance is, we only need to step back to the very end of Warcraft 1. While the history of the formation of the Horde reaches back long before the original Warcraft and helps define the faction throughout its history, there isn't even a discussion of any kind of alliance until the remnants of Azeroth, right now the nation of Stormwind, flee north across the Great Sea to Lordaeron. To add to this, while in documentation Stormwind is referred to as Azeroth many times, I'll be referring to it in this as Stormwind. Upon landing on its shores, Stormwind's refugees were welcomed by Lordaeron with open arms, and King Terenas Menethil quickly convened a council of all neighboring nations and peoples to address the potential threat that the Orcish hordes presented. Stormwind was well known as the strongest and largest human nation, and the fact that they could be destroyed so utterly by anything directly helped reinforce how much of a threat that this group was facing. Amongst the nations and peoples present at the council, a vast majority were human nations. Lordaeron was the convening nation and the most prosperous and well-organized of all of them. There was also the remnants of Stormwind, Kul'Tiras, Stromgarde, Dalaran and the Kirin Tor, Alterac, and Gilneas. In addition, there were two non-human groups present, the Elves of Quel'Thalas and the Dwarves of Cosmodan, made up of forces from Ironforge and Airy Peak respectively. We don't know much on the discussions and negotiations that went on at this council, but we do know a few factions agreed almost instantly to joining their military forces together. Stormwind's remnants and Lordaeron were the original charter members, quickly being joined by Kul'Tiras and Stromgarde, both of which had very clear ideas of the threats presented by the Horde. The Dwarves of Cosmodan and Dalaran took their time coming around on this for unknown reasons, especially considering Ironforge was already under siege from the Horde, and the Elves of Quel'Thalas originally said they weren't interested. But when a group of their rangers were captured by Orc and Troll forces in the area of Terran Mill, they were convinced to join after seeing the skills and abilities of the Alliance military forces. Then you had Gilneas and Alterac. Gilneas, described as the most wealthy and resource-rich human nation on the continent, felt they had the ability to hold out against any military force to try and take them, taking great pride in not only their incredibly defensible position, but also the resources they had access to. They declined joining the Alliance in full, wanting to hold its military back for itself in case it needed to defend its borders. However, from what we know from missions in Warcraft 2 and 3, as well as some game details from Warcraft 3, they did provide supplies and survival gear to the Alliance as a token investment. Alterac was another story entirely. While externally, the nation of Alterac cheered on the Alliance, they chose to join it and then contribute nearly nothing. And although they were centrally positioned in the mountains and highlands of Alterac, and thus easily defensible surrounded by other nations, they chose to retain almost all of their troops at home. The cowardly Lord Perinold, concerned that the Alliance wouldn't be able to stop the Orcish hordes, secretly made a deal with Doomhammer, the Orcish war chief, aligning his nation with them instead, and repeatedly stabbing the other human nations in the back. Their nation was eventually occupied and dissolved by Stromgarde and Lordaeron forces. Stormwind, Lordaeron, Stromgarde, Kulturas, Dalaran, Quel'Thalas, and Cosmodan. These are the nations that formed the Alliance of Lordaeron against the Tides of Darkness. It's through the combined might of these nations that the Orcish invasion of the Eastern Kingdoms was able to be repelled, along with multiple coinciding events. I'll note that this group was specifically called the Alliance of Lordaeron, not just the Alliance, and it did not last long. Once the threat of the Orcish hordes was quashed, and most of the horde was either interned in camps and forts across the Eastern Kingdoms, much of the Alliance of Lordaeron parted ways. Dalaran maintained Nethergarde, even after the Second War concluded, but that was about it. Kulturas returned to managing trade and the open oceans of the Eastern Kingdoms, and eventually terminated Alliance support after the death of Admiral Proudmoore. Stromgarde continued to support the Alliance until it was almost entirely destroyed, eventually becoming just a shadow of its former self, not even able to occupy its own capital in full. Lordaeron was destroyed during the events of Warcraft 3, and while Stormwind survived and rebuilt, it didn't have the military strength to do much until the events of World of Warcraft. Limited numbers of dwarven forces stuck around, and Ironforge always welcomed friendly faces, but official military and supply support was terminated. The elves of Quel'Thalas, having had their runestone network and outlying settlements ransacked, retreated behind their borders to rebuild and heal. We do see elven mages and priests in limited numbers during Warcraft 3 supporting human forces, but it's assumed that these are either individuals who chose to adventure out and assist, or elves who were already with Dalaran or Lordaeron and simply decided to stay with them. To this end, we can conclude that the original Alliance of Lordaeron was discontinued, and while the idea lived on for many citizens, nothing legitimately remained of the agreements that tied the nations and peoples together. By the events of Warcraft 3, where a faction of humans led by Jaina Proudmoore assisted the Night Elves and Horde in defending the World Tree and stopping an invasion from the Burning Legion, we see no sight of any grand alliance. To that extent even, during the Frozen Throne expansion for Warcraft 3, the Night Elves had to contend with issues with Illidan and the Scourge, uniting with the Blood Elves and Prince Kael'thas to do this, a future Horde faction. All this is to say, when we make the 5-year jump between the end of the Frozen Throne and World of Warcraft, we see a brand new alliance, and while Stormwind and Ironforge reinforcing their treaties makes perfect sense, and thus Ironforge dragging the gnomes along for the ride as well, there's something about the Night Elves joining in, too, that's always scratched me the wrong way. The justification used for them joining the Alliance is continued aggressive lumber harvesting on the part of the Horde in Ashenvale, but knowing the reactionary nature of the Kaldorei, that would preclude they would just use their seek and destroy tactics to spread fear and kill off Orcish forces. They did it effectively before and could have easily done so again. While the book Cycle of Hatred gave us few details on the period of time between Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft, not only do I generally discount details portrayed in it, but most later Warcraft lore does as well, so we'll be giving that a pass. What I believe happened is that Blizzard may have been caught in a situation where they really didn't know what to do with the Night Elves if they didn't put them in the Alliance. And while what would make sense is they would have been a secretive and neutral hostile separate faction, that would have also meant a much deeper level of complexity of game design for the original World of Warcraft as a whole. In the end, we had little concrete lore basis for the Night Elves joining this new alliance, and need to accept it was for the sake of balance, inclusion, and simplicity. That brings us to the current era where humans, night elves, dwarves, and gnomes have united once again to protect their normalcy and place in the world, and halt the aggression of the Horde. While little of this new alliance reflects the purpose, drive, or form of the original Alliance of Lordaeron, its renewed diversity has created new ways to solve problems and maintain some diplomatic ties between the two factions. Another time, we'll analyze the old nations of the Alliance of Lordaeron in greater detail, and go into much greater thoughts on the Kaldorei and their creation and implementation in Warcraft 3. We close this book of Warcraft history here and save the rest for another time. If you've enjoyed this feature, please consider subscribing here at youtube.com/theDanNation, as well as joining my Discord at tinyurl.com/Danscord. It's a Discord, but with 100% more Dan. From the Lore Bunker here in Boston, Massachusetts, this is Dan wishing you a wonderful and wide, wide world of lore.